Hey, friend, welcome to another episode of our podcast. And as many of you will know, named last week the Sunday Sitdown. So welcome to the Sunday Sitdown. It's not Sunday for us, and it is, I'm assuming, not Sunday for you. And this is just like a wonderful way for us to continue our conversation throughout the week, and with the goal for you to continue your conversation throughout the week. So to not let Sunday be like the beginning, middle, and end of your Christian life, but to really encourage ourselves together to continue these conversations throughout our week. So the Sunday Sit Down, this is a great name. All we had to do was hire somebody creative and with energy to do all the things that you and I are not creative enough to do.
Exactly.
So wonderful thing. Should we name the person who named the podcast?
She's in the room with us.
She's in the room recording behind one of the cameras.
Thank you, Annabelle.
This is great.
Yeah.
And we hope, again, like at the end of the day, our hope is that you continue to have these similar conversations. And so to that end, we've got 3 questions that are based on, Justin, the sermon you preached from Sunday, which I thought was fantastic and filled with so much meat and goodness that we probably won't get into all of today. But 3 questions based on this story around Jesus's healing of the man possessed by a legion of evil spirits, of demons. The legion speaks to Jesus. Jesus rebukes, sends them away into a herd of pigs. They go off into the sea, which I thought was just this really poetic connection. And you named this.
Disturbingly poetic. But
absolutely. Yeah, not all poetry is like, happy and lovey-dovey, right?
There's Edgar Allan Poe. It's,
I memorized The Raven in high school. Yeah, I could not tell you the whole, but it was like you could get 10 extra % on your year if you memorized Edgar Allan
some of
Poe's.
it, mainly from an episode of The Simpsons, though.
Right.
So that's
I can still think of some lines, but it really, like, it's this poetic connection between the calming of the storm to this really calming of a whirlwind of a storm for an individual and a community. So we get the sea representing this place of evil and spirit and torment and fear, all unknown, the abyss you named, in the story where Jesus calms the sea. And then that theme is carried forward into this interaction with a man, and with the community. And I thought that was actually, as I was listening to your sermon, that's the portion of the text. Like, I think we can really focus on the healing piece and like the kind of shock and awe and demon possession, like legion of them speaking to Jesus, the pigs, like it's this big thing. But I found myself really wrestling with like the people who witness it, and some who don't, but who like arrive on the scene after it's happened. And I think for many of us, like that might have been the most challenging portion of the sermon. So I've got 3 questions. We can talk through those. But is there anything that you want to say just by way of introduction? I thought your way into the sermon was quite astute. And so just want to give you a chance to kind of double down on some of the language around the world of, and this is not exactly the language you used, but the spiritual world, or the world of spirit, and the, what we would call like physical world now, not really being two distinct realms or worlds in this day. So like we divide those things, but that wasn't the case in Jesus'. So anything that you want to like I touched on it 2 weeks ago. I thought you did a really astute job of naming the middle in that and where these places overlap.
So like, a whole bunch of my theological training was actually anthropology. And with the idea being that anthropology is often a sphere that Christians have not delved into too much for a number of reasons. But there have been a number of trailblazers, and the guy I mentioned, Paul Hebert, he was one of them. And so he was the one who coined this phrase, the excluded middle. And this was after conversing with guys like Leslie Newbegin, who we've often quoted from as well, and others who Paul Hebert himself was a missionary in various parts of the world, and noticing the way that the West tends to approach these different worlds, and it's baked into our culture in the same way that in other parts of the world, it's the opposite is baked into their culture. So I even, this is like a really silly example, but like, I probably you and I would have both grown up watching like, Bugs Bunny cartoons and things like that, where, they have an anvil that, flattens them. And then what their little spirit, what does it do? It floats up to heaven, right? and that's baked into this dualistic view that there is the physical world, and then you float up to heaven, which is somehow up there somewhere, and so the idea here is that we need to think rightly about our world, that our world is both physical and spiritual. And to neglect that can be problematic and dangerous. And so that was why I brought that up, just because I know it's a wrestling for me. It's a wrestling for me that when I read some of these passages about these possessed men, individuals, there is a tendency in my mind to think, oh, those are just, ancient Near East people that didn't know what, schizophrenia was. Right. That is something that plays out in my mind. Now, I think it's very clear when you dig deeper that is not the case here. Yeah. Like evident in the way the person, the demons, the legion knew who Jesus was. Yeah. How else would a person in this Gentile region have known, right? Yeah. So, but there is still that tendency, I think, for me. And if I have that tendency, I have to think there are others. I know that there are others because people told me so yesterday. And yet also others told me the opposite, that they are like, we were confronted. They would tell me I was confronted with situations where I was like, oh, this is real. Like there is a spiritual world, spiritual warfare. It's real. Let me tell you, some stories, I can pinpoint the moment. We don't have to get into this, but I can pinpoint the moment in my career as a pastor where that became immediately real for me. And very early on. And it was like the great, leadership and discipleship and mentorship of like a senior pastor who I was working with at the time, who just named it. And I went, oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Here we go. Like I can remember the place. I can remember the time. I can remember exactly where I was standing. And, but we do, like, I think we have this tendency to think that, it's interesting that you mentioned Leslie Newbegin. I was just rereading a section of The Gospel in a Pluralist Society. Yeah. And, like this morning. And that's one of the things that he wrestles out is like, we think that if it can't be empirically proven, shown, demonstrated, evidenced, repeated, then, it's not worth believing and we need to move on from it. So he wrestles it out in talking about powers and principalities, like in Paul's language around the powers and the principalities, and how it's just an assumed part of language and culture and religion and the way life is, that these things are intertwined and connected. They're not separated, that maybe you get this like leap in, like, and it's like this kind of like Ghostbustery, like discombobulated, like something's amiss, and like it's a spirit's like a ghost has run amok. Like, no, it's just like they're not separate, that occasionally touch. It's there's a spiritual realm to life, and it's this really postmodern way to think about the world as just like purely physical. So no, I think that was an astute thing to begin with and point out, because otherwise you come into this story with a whole lot of different assumptions about how this man is healed or not, or is to a different degree.
And I say different, not lesser, like in a different way.
Yep.
But I think you're right on when Legion names Jesus, you go, oh. So also saying something about who Jesus is in such a profound way. But so 3 questions then to jump off that, because we don't have time to dive into all of, maybe, the questions that that might bring for people. But I would just say, as an additional plug, send us your questions. On any of our conversation.
Which admittedly we did not check this morning. So if they did send questions, I'm sorry. We didn't get any last week and then I forgot to do it.
They'll be next week. It was 3 questions for application today. I found it really interesting so question 1 is for ourselves, thinking through how Jesus has this ability to call us out of some of these similar ways of death. I found it really interesting that this man who's demon possessed wandered, like he's wandering the tombs, like the place of, like it's just creepily poetic that he's hanging out in and amongst the tombs. And I don't think we're told exactly why. Like it's not that we're not sure, like he's not been banished there. It was a place where typically people who were seen to be as demon possessed would congregate, would go, and would live. They were typically excluded from culture, society, cities, towns, etc. But I've heard a line, and it's a line actually that my wife uses a lot in her work. And so I'm not sure, I'm not gonna be able to quote where she got it from. Maybe she came up with it. But it's like rats are drawn to garbage.
Yep.
And it's like, man, this guy who is possessed by this legion of demons is drawn to this place of death and decay and darkness. And so I picture him, he's literally called out of this place of death and given life. And it's really interesting that, to me, like when we read in the New Testament, typically healed, when we read that word in English, healed, it's the same word that is often used to mean saved.
Yes.
And I think that's the case here. And I think you mentioned that. It's not only that this guy's healed, he is saved. This is a conversion moment. What does that look like for us today? How do you see in our daily life ways in which Jesus calls us out of these places of death? And I would even say, what are the practices that would encourage that to happen? Because I do think that there's like a role to play in discussing, like positioning yourself for Jesus to call that out of you.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the questions that I couldn't quite answer yesterday. I kind of asked the question not knowing the answer of, how did this happen to the guy? Like how could this man have positioned himself and poised his life to be, I don't know the answer, I mean, maybe you have a thought, but I still don't know the answer to that. And the Bible doesn't say, but I think that, we can extrapolate that question for us, where we might be able to look at the answer, right? When we look at our lives and the darker places of our life, the dead places in our life. When we really reflect, we can actually kind of trace it back and be like, something happened here. For some people it's a bunch of intentional choices, poor choices that were made over the course of, little tiny choices over the course of days and weeks and months and eventually years that have led them to this very dead place. I think about someone in addiction of some kind, right? It's a bunch of small choices, often rooted in trauma and other things like that. But it's a bunch of small choices that have been made day by day, week by week, year by year, and then all of a sudden it's like, how did they get there? Well, You trace it back, right? That's a fairly extreme example. Like there are lots of things in my life that I places that I have seen God work through and redeem. And I can look back. I can see where it came from. I can see how God drew me out of that. And I would say one of the key pieces in that is being honest with God first and foremost. So looking at my, a circumstance in my life where I say, okay, this is bad enough that I need to like bring this to light, even just in my own heart before God. Right. And that's where, so that's, often a prayer of desperation, of like, God, my life sucks right now. I need you here. Right. And being able to just admit that. Right. And this is honestly, this is like, some 12 steps type stuff. Like when you're in like and it applies to far more than, alcohol or other things like that. But like, usually it's admitting to yourself and to God that you have a problem, that you need help, that like, that's the first thing. Like you can't do anything when you're in denial about a situation that you're struggling through. Right. Yeah. And again, like it's easy to point to things like substances as being one of the bigger things, but it goes from like, I've got a spending problem. I've got a screen addiction problem. I've got like just name any issue in our world today or your world. And, you can say like, hey, I need help here. Right.
Yeah. Well, so like one of the things, and you named this, one of the things that we're both wrestling through this summer is how do we lower our screen time?
Yeah.
Given the fact that we spend so much time on screens for work, like I'm not going back to writing sermons by hand. I will always use a computer. I'm not going to handwrite. Like I'm not going to be able to read it on Sunday.
I'm such a slow, when I would have to like write essays, like, like high school exams, have to like write an essay by hand.
I can feel it. I can still feel it.
My hand would cramp up. It was awful.
But one of the things that I've appreciated about like this idea, so I said like I'm gonna spend as little time on screens as possible. I'm gonna ditch phones. Like I'm gonna try to not spend any time on my phone, like screen time as little as possible. Want to be present. Don't want life to be driven by the algorithm. I don't want it choosing what YouTube video I watch next, or Netflix suggesting something that I continue watching, or social media, endless scrolls, and just pumping out the same thing over and over again. I don't want my news feed driven by I read this article, so it's gonna pump all of these similar. Like I don't want the echo chamber. And so early on in the summer said, hey, to kind of small group of people, I'm doing something stupid, and kind of silly, like, do you want in? And lo and behold, there were a number of people who were like, yep, game on, also in. And that for me was like it to name something, this is in some ways I think it's significant, and in some ways it's not a serious thing. We're having some fun with it. But the naming of something to someone else is like a more powerful thing than I think we ever realize.
Yes.
Also the thing that we're like the most deeply afraid of.
Well, and there's a little bit of like a denial in the process as well, where you're like, actually, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not compelled by the algorithm in the way that you're describing. Like that's not a problem for me. And then, so what I've started noticing, so like, just as one example, and I know this is still technically a screen, but like, Sunday afternoon, we throw the baseball game on and we're just watching that on our TV. And I said it to my wife. I'm like, I want to avoid the thing where this is on and I'm also doing this. And so like, I've like, my phone is in the other room, out of reach. But how often commercial break comes on and I'm like itching to like,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, maybe I do have a problem, you know, like where
Yeah.
you're confronted with the reality that you've been in denial about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I started noticing it when I was waiting for things, like, you know, dentist office. I had to take one of my kids into to the dentist.
Yep.
And, you know, brought something for her to do. She's reading a book, she's coloring, writing, doing, you know, whatever. And I reached for my pocket and I was like, oh, I don't have my phone. What am I going to do? I'm going to sit here.
Yeah.
And so I did, like I sat, that was it. I brought a book with me. So I read, that's where I noticed it. Is just you start reaching for it. So, but I think like the important thing for like relevant for our discussion is like, there's power in naming something to somebody else.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, what you've said is you've got to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You have to be honest with God. And I think where that leads,
someone
where
else.
exactly, it
Someone
leads
else.
you to saying, hey, this is something that God is doing in my life. I'm not sure what it means. I'm not sure where it leads, but I am sure enough, like I need to speak it.
Yeah.
So I think that the honesty is helpful and then like is necessary.
Yeah.
And then it's got to be concrete in that way of naming it, not just to yourself, not just to God, but to somebody else.
Yeah, because like I can name something to myself and sort of just like let it fester, you know? And I could even name something to God and be like, God, would you, you know, just miraculously deal with this? But it is usually the way that God works is that when we bring something to light, I think to God and to another, that we can actually be drawn out of those dark places. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's in naming it to somebody else that you allow them to speak goodness into the place of like almost this like void.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think of like Legion leaves and then what for this guy? Like, so all of life can change. He goes, like he sits at the feet of Jesus. He wants to be a disciple. Jesus gives him something to do in its place. So there's a task given. Yeah, I think there is a place as well for people to speak what is true and good into your life in its in the place of the thing. Yeah. Okay. So you got to be honest with yourself. You got to be honest with God, and then you have to be honest with somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously we want that to be a safe person who, you know, is going to walk with you slowly and carefully,
And follow up with you.
Yeah.
And to check in, you know, and see how things are going. And, you know, I have friends in my life that I have to remember to check in with. And it's an intentional thing. It's like, hey, how is this going for you? And you know, they're usually pretty good at getting back to me, and they're usually pretty good at being honest. Or if I feel like they're not being as forthright as I think they should be, I try to probe a little further, and you know, like, and not in a way that I'm trying to like, I'm not trying to like get like the juicy details of their life. I'm just saying like, hey, are you being fully transparent with yourself about this?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I like that. So name the question again. How do you ask it to your friend?
You know, like, well, so I usually say like, how is blank going for you?
Yeah.
You know, these days.
Which is very different than how are you doing?
Yes.
Or how are things going?
Yeah.
Like a specific question
Yeah.
is a question that can include accountability and some level of, hey, let's not do the whole run around.
Yeah.
This, you know, outside skirt the kind of.
But the thing is, you have to have invited someone into that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of, you know, I have a friend who has very specifically said, I want you to ask me about this.
Yeah.
And I'd say, great. It makes it easy when you don't have to beat around the bush, that you can just talk about it. Yeah.
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 Great. So the demon-possessed man, he sits at Jesus' feet, and I love that he said, like, that's the place of a disciple. He wants to follow Jesus. His life has been changed. He's been saved. Jesus sends him away. We're going to get to that in a minute. But in the meantime, there's a whole bunch of villagers who are afraid.
Not happy.
Yeah, and they're not happy. They're angry. I think it's safe,
Yeah.
like it's safe to say that they're angry.
Yeah.
They beg Jesus to leave. And again, you touched on a lot of why that might be. And I think in large part it's they're confronted with the power of Jesus, and it makes them uncomfortable, and it makes them lose control. So they have a situation, it's not great, but it's controlled, and it's controlled to enough of a degree that they're comfortable with how things are.
Yeah.
Now Jesus demonstrates a greater power than the power that was in this man. They're afraid of that. They don't know what is going on.
Yeah.
The pigs are gone. There's some woe is me, I think, mentality there.
Yeah.
What does this mean for, like, at least the guy didn't, interrupt our livelihood, our ability to work.
Because like now, bacon is about to get a lot more expensive in the region.
This is it. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It absolutely is.
I tried to like work that in the sermon, and it
didn't
didn't fly, and so I cut it. But I was like, you know what? Saving it for the podcast.
So the question is, where do you think we run the risk of also tipping toward wanting to remain comfortable and in control? How are some of the ways we do that, rather than truly being confronted by the power of Jesus?
I think that's honestly, like, that's our expertise here in the West. Like, I think in our, like, we have so many creature comforts available to us at every point that are, if you are even, I say, like, anywhere from like lower middle class to upper class, our life is full of comfort, in a way that has not always been the case for much of the world and for much of history. Right. I was just in Scotland a couple weeks ago, and walking around these these ancient castle ruins and whatnot, and imagining what their life was. And it's like, man, even the people who were real rich and had like castles, their life still kind of sucked in some ways. Like, they had lots of vices and comforts and whatnot, but
it was still hard.
There was parts I think that would have, like, compared to what we've got now. Like, I'll take what we've got now rather than living in this castle, seriously. So it's everywhere. Like potential vices and like it's everywhere. And I think it's gotta be a choice to say to God, I don't want comfort to be my goal in life and my aim in life. I can't say that every day of my life. I've talked a little bit, and maybe this is maybe a concrete example. I've talked a little bit over the years about some of my challenges with chronic pain, and last September I had a very major back surgery to correct a long-standing issue, and there's been this tension in my soul as we talk about chronic pain. I mean, life can be painful sometimes. As we get old, we age, and we have more pain in our bodies. Life becomes less uncomfortable, or less comfortable. But for me, I was wrestling with, okay, what is me wanting and desiring comfort and wanting to be free from pain, and what is hey, something's actually not right in my, in my body that needs to be fixed, right? That was a thing that I was wrestling with for a long time leading up to. And now, I mean, I can look back now and be like, man, almost a year later, like I feel so much better. And I'm like, this is better.
Yeah.
that sort of thing, that was better to not have that degree of constant pain and discomfort, right? And yet the tendency is still there. The tendency is still there, I think, for all of us to reduce discomfort. Anything we can do, I keep doing double negatives. Anything we can do to feel more comfortable is seen as a net good, right? And I don't know how we get over that hurdle. I don't know how we, collectively as a society, or even maybe just even smaller level as a church, to say that is actually not the goal of life, because it's not the goal of life. And yet the goal of life is also not to be gluttons for punishment and to constantly seek out painful situations. But I do feel like we need a bit of a wake up call. I don't know. What do you think? What do you?
I read a book a few years ago called The Comfort Crisis, and I'm not going to remember the name of the author. You can check for us.
I'm on it.
Great. But one of the arguments in that book is that
By Michael Easter.
Michael Easter. I was going to guess Michael something. So great. It's worth reading. Not a religious book, not a Christian book, not a discipleship book, but I think one of the main points, one of his main arguments is that nobody grows. You don't get better when you are comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and that's just like, as cliche as that is, you don't grow emotionally, typically in seasons that are easy.
Yeah.
Right? When, I look back on my life, I think most of us would look back on the moments where we've seen greatest growth in our life, and also would associate some of our deepest pains. So he really, he wrestles that out. How do we not become people who pursue discomfort for the sake of it, but who embrace the reality of it? Because I think that's the thing that I'm constantly struck by is we do pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain.
Yeah.
That's pretty typically
kind of natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we all also, I think, would readily admit that we can't do that perfectly.
Yeah.
No matter how hard I try to eliminate pain from my life, there will be painful experiences. And all I'm doing is avoiding until I can't avoid. Right? And so that's why I think we end up with various addictions and vices. What we're trying to do at the end of the day is, in many ways, numb pain of various kinds. So you get physical pain, chronic physical pain that you try to numb. You get emotional pain. You have trauma responses. You have coping mechanisms. Some are good, some are bad. There's a lot of different pain that we try to avoid.
Also, there is, for someone who has a what we would say is a very good life, there is almost this the malaise of life, where it's almost you want to feel something, or you want to numb something of just the general, if someone is generally comfortable and they're just but I want more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we need to reckon with life being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And embrace it, and ask, I think this beautifully open-ended question of what is Jesus inviting you into in the midst of it, and how is he meeting you in the midst of it? So, I think it's important that we came off the storm into this story, because the disciples have just talk about uncomfortable,
right? So physically uncomfortable, in danger, fear for their lives kind of moment that Jesus navigates them through. And then they land on this opposite shore where they typically wouldn't like to go, in a region where they are unfamiliar with people, and like there's a level of discomfort in meeting this man with the legion of demons. And so, you know, I think I think as much as we can do to embrace discomfort and wonder our way through it, the more we will, I think, naturally look for and hope for and pray for and watch for and experience Jesus in the midst of it. The more we try to numb or avoid or just completely, like, everything is comfortable, I can, you know, manage everything is within my control, I can control everything, then like the less we are positioned to experience Jesus in the midst of that kind of life. So, you know, I think, pursuing comfort, pursuing pleasure, pursuing the avoidance of pain, even to put it in that negative way, ultimately, I think we'll end up still experiencing discomfort, pain, and
just might be delayed.
Difficulty. It might be delayed. And, you know, in those moments where I think we see people and experience ourselves, these much larger crises of now out of nowhere kind of thing. So, you know, the villagers, I think, are in the midst of this, and they kind of this like turtle move of like, what about us? We got to get rid of this guy. We're afraid of him. We're let's just wall ourselves off, control what we can control. Kind of like that seems to be their MO, is to cling back control.
But I still wonder what happens to them once the dust is settled. And I kind of mused about that a little bit toward the end of like, what, you know, once they, you know, perhaps had economically recovered from their, you know, from things, like what, this man's story, you know, what impact might that have had on them as they, you know, perhaps their hearts got softened at some point toward what Jesus had done in that place, you know?
So my third question is, how do we become like this man who, like, really the last word, the final word is like, go and tell, right? Go and tell what God has done. And so he goes and he tells. And I've flipped off the verse right now because I was looking for a couple other passages through our conversation. But if I flip back over to Luke 8, we've got this... the last verse, 39, return to your home, like go home, declare how much God has done for you. So that it's like quantifiable, like go and share the abundance of what has happened and what you've experienced. And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him.
I love that, you know, Jesus is like, tell what God's done. And then he's like, I'm going to tell you how much Jesus has done. Like there's a I think a subtle messianic, you know, component to what's happening there.
There's a theological statement being made here
for sure,
that Jesus says, go and share what God has done. And the man, Luke is being very intentional. The man goes and shares what Jesus has done. So I can't remember if it was Craddock who had the line or N.T. Wright who points this out, but you know, essentially the same thing, that he says, if you want to tell people what God has done, tell them what Jesus has done. And I think we'd take it one step further than what N.T. Wright says, like, tell them what Jesus has done in your life. How do we do that though? Like, and how do we do it in a way that's not, and I love that you say this, it's not like, don't be the jerk Christian. Right? Which was, like, I think one of the lines. But like, how do we do it? We talk about living in this pluralist, multicultural, religiously diverse, secular age forum. Like, how do we share what Jesus has done in concrete ways that isn't like skirting the edges of what Jesus has done. Like, no, this is like real life transformation. How do you do it in a way that actually lands in a pluralist, secular society?
I think in some ways that's the way you must approach in a pluralist secular society, because it is rooted in my experience. Right? Here's what Jesus has done in my life. Here is like, look, I like you can easily say to someone, and I've had conversations like this with friends, where they are, they grew up, they had a bad experience in church, and they're not, interested in a particular brand of type of Christianity. But they see me and they're like, hey, you seem like you're somewhat sane individual, and I'm like, well, you don't really know me. but like as we're talking, like, look, hey, I know that you're wrestling through, like, whether God is real. I know that you're wrestling through, how there can be all these different, faiths, and whether or not one or the other can be true or whatever, right? It's like, all I can share is what Jesus has done. Like, here's for me. And I think just like, I don't think this flies personally. I don't think this flies super well at a kind of distant level, in terms of like, going to a stranger and just saying like, hey, here's what Jesus has done for me. For me, it's like my neighbors and my friends in we're walking to school with walking my daughter to school with other parents, and chatting with them and getting to know them and hearing their stories, and them hearing my story, and them sort of being like, okay, tell me more, and that's been really interesting. Like, and I want more of that. I admittedly, I wish I would like more of that. And it's not as often as I would like, because I'm the type who doesn't want to be pushy. I don't want to be that, I don't want to be that guy. But there is something, people can't refute my story. And I can say, this is what God has done. This is what Jesus has done in my life. That, man, like, I was going through the ringer with all sorts of just challenges, and I, the thing I often point to is I, was working through some struggles from my childhood, some things that I went through. And I would say it was, my psychiatrist, who was a Christian woman, wonderful, but the way that she brought Jesus into it, the way that this was like, Jesus is the one who brings healing. And for me to be able to say like, hey, like, I am forever indebted to that season of my life where I was working through some pretty heavy stuff in my life, but it was Jesus. It was Jesus who walked with me through that stuff. And I'm not expecting everyone to understand that. But I think actually that's where the man in the story here, he also would have known a lot of these people. They would have seen him before. They would have seen him after. Right. And for him to be able to say like, hey, you saw what I was like. Look what Jesus has done. And I've seen that story with many people, with people who, at a previous church that I worked at, they had a very large Celebrate Recovery program. So a lot of people with emotional hurts and addictions and things like that, like the contrast from before and after, and they would get up there and say like, look what Jesus has done. And it's like, I can't refute that. Like, goodness.
And the joy that is often accompanying those types of stories and testimonies is in my mind, like, irrefutable. So, somebody might walk away and be offended by it. But it's because it's real. Like, this is something that you can't shrug off. I think that's the only thing that I would add, because yes, to all of that you've shared. Like, I do. I have conversations with people who say, I don't know where to begin with evangelism. And so we say, begin with your own story. Like, talk about what Jesus has done in your life.
wrestle it out, think it through, pray through it, like wonder, ask yourself, like how really has my life changed? And almost allow Jesus to confront you in that again.
Yeah.
Like if you're struggling to really think, well, it's like my life really isn't much different. Like I was kind of, I was addicted to work before, and I'm still addicted to working. Like allow yourself to be confronted in that and challenged, and maybe things still need to change. Maybe they're like, for all of us, yes, things still need to change.
Yeah.
But begin with your story and share the hope that rattles around in your bones.
Yeah.
That's the place to begin. I had a prof who used to quote, and I've probably used this quote already in this podcast. So I had a prof in seminary who would quote John Mackay, who was a missionary and then prof and president at the seminary that I attended. He has this line: you have to earn the right in any sort of mission work. You have to earn the right to be heard.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it. Like you don't do it by opening up your Bible and saying, hey, let me argue my way into your life and you into faith. And like, I know that's like even comical to kind of suggest, like not many people are running around trying to do that, wanting to do like that. That's terrifying to many people, but
there are people though.
I think we have that perception of it. Yeah. And so, it starts with like relational evangelism. And I don't mean like date somebody to convert them. I mean,
flirt to convert.
Yeah, that's the line. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. It begins with real life relationship, right? People need to know you, and you need to earn the right to be heard and trusted in someone's life, just like others need to earn your trust. Like there are real life relationships that ought to be impacted and shaped by your faith. But you got to have the relationship. So, earn the right to be heard. And then the other piece that I would also say is Leslie Newbegin talks about how like the gospel is offensive. So don't be afraid of offending somebody because of the gospel. Be careful not to offend them because you're being a jerk.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like let Jesus offend people. Let's not offend people ourselves. But let's let the gospel be offensive.
As we saw in the story that that they were repelled by what happened in the events that occurred and what Jesus had done. And that is the nature of the gospel, that there will be people that will be drawn in and people that will, whether it's forever or just at that season, they will be repelled because they're resistant to hearing, they are whatever, right?
And maybe because something in them needs to be offended.
Yeah.
Maybe they need to, like, maybe the offense is often necessary. So you get Legion, who's more than offended by Jesus, right? By Jesus's rebuke.
Yeah.
And it's what's necessary. Like it calls the thing out of him. So I think it requires real life relationship, and also it requires a little bit of offense. Yeah. But allow Jesus to be offensive. Don't be offensive yourself.
Yeah.
Any last words?
I don't think so. This was it was a challenge. Like I was telling the prayer team before we gathered, I was like, I struggle with passages like that deal with like intense stuff like this. So it was but God, I think, stretched me, and I was excited to sort of draw out some of the things that we've talked about here and to do it here. Anyways, it was fun, and I pray that it encourages us as we try to wrestle some of this out as well. So,
But I want to say thanks for doing it well and for leading us through it in like a really wise, astute, powerful way. And we hope that it helps you have some good conversation into this week, because we know even within our own church, like our own little congregation, people are going to approach passages like this differently, and we're going to be offended at it for different reasons, and it's going to challenge different things inside of us. The thing that I would just say is, if it's challenging something inside of you, talk to somebody about it, because that's probably a good thing.
Lean in rather than check out.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope you have a great week, and we will see you in the next episode.